Nobody worries when Germany wants to take a more assertive role in European affairs. Nobody starts to freak out about resurgent German nationalism when they increase the size of their military, or when they say that they're going to contribute to UN peacekeeping forces or actions by NATO. The reason that they do that is because the Nuremberg trials weren't the end. Germany didn't just say, what happened in World War II was a few crazies took us over and dragged the unwilling country into hell and Lebensraum. What Germany did was acknowledge that the German people were co-opted into this, that they went along with this, that for whatever reasons, they bought into this vision of Germany's future. And when they recognized that, and when they denazified themselves and shamed that attitude, and turned their back on that kind of militant nationalism, it cleansed German nationalism, it cleansed the German cultural memory, and it meant that Germany was more easily able to coexist in a post-World War II world. Right. Two questions in this debate. Firstly, why is it so important that World War II's culture and cultural legacy specifically are cleansed, which deals with our extension and most of the stuff imposing government opposition, and secondly, the way that people will react and why collective punishment and collective responsibility is the only way to achieve efficient second area in which to proceed. So this first area, why it is so important to deal with World War II and the remnants of World War II in Japan's cultural legacy. And this is basically ties into why I mentioned Germany in my introduction. Because Germany and Japan were the two states who at the end of World War II, had the potential to have their entire culture, their entire caricature of nationalism, and their entire post-war experience defined by their experience in war. They took two very divergent paths. Germany chose to confront the realities of German militant nationalism and Nazism and purge that from its society. Whereas Japan preferred to go with what the opposition preferred, which is that some people were bad, but I wasn't bad. My ancestors weren't bad, and even though they participated in rape and bandaging, even though they were a kamikaze who flew planes into ships, even though they were part of Pearl Harbor, even though they cheered when we learned that we'd invaded China and Southeast Asia, they bear no responsibility because they were just blindly following orders. What are the implications of that? The material that Tom brought you that weren't dealt with by closing opposition. The implication is twofold. Firstly, it ties Japanese nationalism, because Japanese nationalism hasn't been purged of militarism, with this concept, which means that if you're a nationalist in Japan, you're associated with this militarism. That means that moderates don't want to associate with nationalists. They feel like they have to be a pacifist, or else they have to be like Abe and visit the shrine which interns war criminals and honour the memory and the cultural appreciation of the crimes that Japanese people did commit during World War II. It also means that other countries in the region, especially China, especially South Korea, or the Philippines, are very terrified when Japan does things like it's doing at the moment and increases the size of its armed forces. When they do things like become more assertive over the Senkaku Islands, because it raises the spectre of the things that occurred in World War II. Why? Because Japanese nationalism and militarism are still in the fight. That's something they haven't dealt with. So what happens, to deal with what Closing said was their extension, that Abenomics means that Japanese nationalism isn't a problem anymore because everyone in Japan buys into this idea that I should pay high taxes so that Japan can one day be a superpower. That is just completely and utterly ridiculous, because the reason that Abe was the first Japanese leader since World War II to visit the shrine, the World War of the War Criminals, was because he realized that the world today means that it is very unattractive and very impractical for Japan to be pacifist. So he realized he has to be more assertive, he has to be more nationalist. And the only way he knows how to be nationalist is to tie into those cultural perceptions, or buy into that militarism that corrupted Japanese nationalism during World War II and still defines that kind of nationalism. So it's not okay to say Abenomics, therefore no problem, because you have to look at what Abenomics is trying to achieve. Abenomics is trying to achieve a more powerful Japanese state, but what a more powerful Japanese state will look like is shaped by this nationalism that is inextricably tied to their inextricably tied to militarism. So what happens when you shame the soldiers who were involved in World War II, and you shame all of them and don't say some of them were culpable and some weren't? It means that Japan is forced to confront the reality of what World War II Japan was like. The reality that Japanese people all over the country bought into this kind of culture, bought into this nationalism, and therefore aided its progression and openly were happy to achieve its aims. When they confront it, when they shame it, they go that extra step of shaming it, they turn their back on it, and it diverges militarism and nationalism and cleanses it in a way that Tom want to talk about and they didn't want to deal with. Because what it says there is you can be a nationalist without thinking that what happened in the rape of Nanjing was okay, or apologising for it by saying, hey, the Allies were pretty bad as well. When you confront those realities and when you reject those realities, then Japanese nationalism becomes a cleanse force, and Japanese nationalism becomes something that no longer needs to be feared.
Just because ordinary Japanese people don't support war crimes doesn't mean they don't have a sense of national pride. When you say that they should all feel guilty just because they lost the war and when other countries aren't helped to, do you think that means that they're worried about that direct attack on their sense of nationhood?
We're not saying that Japan should feel guilty because it's lost the war. In fact, the only problem, the only reason that many Japanese people feel guilty today is because they lost the war and losing them by shame. We're saying that Japanese people should feel guilty because during the war, they bought into a culture that condoned and encouraged the rape of Nanjing, that said Pearl Harbor was okay, that said it was okay to view non-Japanese people as lesser beings and rape them and torture them with no regard for their human rights. And the fact that other countries did it in the war is completely and utterly irrelevant, because saying, oh, America did it, therefore I did it as well, the fact that I did it is okay, or saying some individuals in Japan did it and some individuals that I didn't do it and that's okay, is apologism. And apologism does not purge militarism from nationalism, because it says, oh yeah, some people were bad, that kind of militant ideology was applied badly at some times, but the ideology itself is sound. Maybe we can try it again one day, when we've finally got these new subs online and we've been building in response to China's actions in the Super Islands. And that basically sums up the second clash, this idea of how Japanese people will react. Because what they've missed alongside opposition is that collective responsibility is the only way for Japan to confront this. Because the culture, to actually confront Japanese culture instead of just assigning it with the responsibility and actively change it, is to realize that all the individuals who participated in that culture endorsed that culture. And that's why shame is such an important thing, especially in the context of an Asian culture. Because when you recognize that being associated with militarism is something to be ashamed of something that you need to cleanse from your honor, then it means that you're much less likely to buy into that into the future, and means that you've truly turned the corner. Mr. Speaker, Japan is nationalism, and Japan's nationalism is still living in the world of World War II. That's been okay when it's been alright for them to just get pacifist nations. That's not the world we're living in anymore. Japan's going to have to be increasingly assertive. It's going to have to be increasingly nationalist. When that happens, we want them to turn their back on militarism. We want them to feel ashamed of what happened in World War II.